Hey, welcome to Riverside. Today we're going to talk about late fall bass fishing tips, a little bit about midterms and what Christians should do post midterms, and also, especially, Cain and Abel. So, like the YouTube, follow the Instagram, share our content, all that stuff, and tight lines. Let's get started. Alright, so to start today, I want to talk about fishing. We're going to talk about late fall bass fishing tips. There's a common misconception among the fly fishing world that fly fishing really is just for trout. And if you want to go fly fishing, you have to catch trout. If you catch anything else, you're not really being genuine to the fly fishing industry or fly fishing world and all that stuff. That's just not the case. And to be completely honest with you, some of the best fly fishing has nothing to do with trout. Matter of fact, bass, of course, are a great time or a great fish to catch while fly fishing. And so today we're talking about late fall bass fishing tips. Now, I'm no expert. I'm really not. But one thing that I do try to do every single day is learn something new about fly fishing. With that said, one good resource is Carl's Bait and Tackle. They put out tips and tricks often, and it's real simple, small things that you can easily remember. And so today we're going to talk about something from their page, and that's late fall bass fishing tips. And the things that they said really make a lot of sense. Really make a lot of sense. For starters, they talked about fish movement and how fish move at this point in the year. During the fall, bass are really active. They're really active. It's perfect temperature for them, and so because of that, they're moving around a lot. They're very aggressively hunting and eating their prey, and so because of that, they're very active. Winter, on the other hand, winter is the complete opposite. During the wintertime, they get lethargic. They get cold. They don't want to do anything. When you fish for them, you're gonna have to fish a lot slower than you normally would, and so that's part of the game of winter fishing. And so once you hit late fall, it's kind of a mixture of the two, more or less. It's really a mixture of the two. Essentially, bass at this point will slowly be moving to their winter hole or their winter spot. Generally, fish in the wintertime won't really move around a ton. So at this point, the bass are looking for a spot to hole up for the winter. And so what you can do, if you're really wanting to go fishing during the cold, which some people do, and I probably will as well, but what you can do is go and find these deep holes where fish might hole up and fish at those spots. And those deep holes are generally a good spot for bass. But with that said, this migration or this movement from the aggressive fall times and their places to a winter spot is a process. It didn't happen immediately. So also fish those fall spots and kind of fish wherever it is in between. This will help you target the fish that you're looking for, and hopefully through that you can kind of figure out what their patterns are, figure out how they're moving, what they're doing, and get a better idea of how to catch them. So fish those deep holes, but also fish their regular fall spots, and then try to find some spots in between where they might be during that time of the year. Another point that they made is this: at this point in the year, vegetation will be dying, and this is going to push bass to their winter spot even more. Because of this, they made a few good points. You should try to fish at spots that have changes in the bottom type. So if it goes from sandy to rocky or anything like that, so you generally want to fish there. So changes in the bottom type, some changes in depth. If you go from a really shallow part to like a really strong drop off, it's a good spot to fish. I've had some luck at those points. And the same is true for the wintertime. And along weed lines. Weed lines are underrated if you ask me. For some reason, I've had a lot of luck next to weed lines with bluegill as well and like bait fish. But bass like to stay there too. And so if you fish along weed lines at this point, that you're going to have some luck. So hopefully, with all those tips, you can get out there and catch some fish. I know I plan to use these tips whenever I hit the river next, and hopefully you will too. So let's recap it real quick. Once again, bass at this point will slowly be moving from their fall spots to their winter spots. So find those deep holes, fish them low and slow, and also fish those fall spots too if you need to, and kind of the places in between. And also, like I said, changes in the type of bottom, the bottom of the river or lake, sudden changes in depth and weed lines. Hit those spots. Let me know how it goes for you. Fishing for me has been slow, not because I haven't been able to catch any, but because I haven't even been able to go to the river. It's been a super busy month for me. But I'd love to hear how it works for you and what works for you and what doesn't, especially for late fall and early winter. Now we're going to switch gears, talk about midterms. Midterms just came up, and midterms are an important time of year, if you ask me. Basically because it's important who we put into office. And I think sometimes we just pass over and skip over midterms and it's just not important, this and that, but it really is. It really is important. In our midterms here in Louisville, we voted for judges. We talked about the sheriff, mayor. We voted for school district, like all kinds of stuff. And a lot of times we just act flippantly about the midterm, but it really does matter. And the people we put in place their choices really have an effect on the regular day-to-day life of a lot of people. And so I think it's silly to just pass over it and look over it and act like it doesn't matter, because it really, at the end of the day, it does. And I think more and more as time has gone past, especially these last 2 years, we've seen more and more just how important it is to have good elected officials who care about the people they represent, who make the right decisions, who look for truth and justice and honesty and all that stuff. It's really important. And it's hard to come by, too, which is really sad. Regardless, this past Tuesday was election day, which means that whether you're watching it now or at some point in the near future, at some point we're going to have new elected officials. It seems like in a polarized world that we live in, you're probably going to be either really happy or really frustrated with it if you follow politics and you're into that kind of stuff. And it seems like it's one side who's very pleased with the results and the other side who is very frustrated. Regardless of how you feel about the situation or who got elected or who's in office or any of that stuff, our job as Christians living in America is just not over yet. I don't know if it ever really will be over, but it's certainly not yet. And here's the reason why this matters. If you look at Jeremiah 29:7, it says, "Pursue the well-being of the city I have deported you to. Pray to the Lord on its behalf, for when it thrives, you will thrive." This is obviously the book of Jeremiah. The people he's talking about are people who are exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. So they're in a place where they don't belong. It's not their land. It's not where they're supposed to be. But he still tells them to pursue the well-being of the city he's deported them to, and to pray on its behalf. And I think it's really important back then that they did that. But I think this also applies to us. Excuse me, I think this also applies to us. When it comes to midterms and where we're at in our society, it seems like nobody is that optimistic about where our country is headed. If you talk to most people, the general consensus is we're in for hard times. It's going to be a rude awakening. We really need to change course. And the issue is how. Do we change course this way or this way? Regardless, prayer is important. It says pray to the Lord on its behalf, on behalf of your city, or in our case, our state or our country. For when it thrives, you will thrive. Prayer is important. Regardless of whether you're happy or frustrated about the state of our world, the state of our country, and who's in office, you need to pray about it. You need to pray about it. You need to spend some time praying for your elected officials. I know people say that and it sounds silly, but we do. We need to pray that they make the right decisions. We need to pray that they look for truth and honor and justice, and that they act in a way that's good. Because let's say you had a judge who is corrupt and who's making all kinds of corrupt decisions. That's not good for anybody. And we should be praying that they make better decisions. So we should be praying for our elected officials, praying that they make good decisions, praying that they do the right thing and all that stuff. Prayer is powerful. Why not apply it to our state, our city, or our country? Second thing, excuse me, my allergies. Second thing that's important is to pursue. First one was pray. Second thing is pursue. Pursue the well-being of the city I have deported you to. What does that look like? What does that look like? It's definitely, when you think of the word pursue, it's a word of action. I used to be in law enforcement, and a pursuit is something that you're involved in. It's something that you're really trying, and it's something that you're pushing for. And it's the same thing with this. This isn't a word of just lackadaisical, haphazard, whatever. Like, it's not like that. It's a word of action, and so we should be pushing and trying to enact better policies, things that are going to benefit more people, things that are more righteous and good and truthful, and etc. So what that looks like here in modern day America is this. Most of us don't have any power, generally. Most of us don't have any real power. We don't have a platform where tons of people follow us. We don't have any political power or anything like that. So we really don't have much of a way to really enact change ourselves. But what we can do is talk about things. We can talk about things and talk with people and try to help people see the truth and the light, and try to use reasoning and logic and try to help people discern between right and wrong. We can do a lot of things even though we don't have a ton of power. And what you'll notice is that when a lot of people band together and use their voice as one voice, things change. Things change. And so I think it's naive to say, well, we have no power, so we really shouldn't do anything about it, because we do. And I think it's important. I think it's really important. So we should be praying for our elected officials as Christians. Pray for who's in office. Pray that they make good decisions, but also push for goodness. Push for policies that are just. Push for policies that help people. We should be pushing to help people see truth and to get past the lies and the stuff like that of the media and different celebrities or this and that. We should pursue and actively push for a better society. This is something that's lost on a lot of Christians. And I think a lot of Christians don't want to do anything with it because they don't want to step on toes. And I get it. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It's necessary. And my last point with Jeremiah 29:7 is the last 6 words. When it thrives, you will thrive. That's the reason we do this kind of stuff. That's the reason we should be involved in politics in a way. I don't want to say, I don't think we should be overly involved in politics. We certainly should never make a god out of politics. But I think Christians should be involved in politics in the sense that we should be talking with people about political issues. We should be talking to people about abortion or race in America, or justice, or the justice system, or our border, whatever it might be. We should be talking to people about these issues, because when our country does well, our people do well, and our families do well, and our friends do well, and we do well. It's a way to love your neighbors. It's getting involved in politics and trying to push for things that are good. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, by the way, because I know that's probably controversial. I'm thinking of my own church here, and I know that there's probably a lot of people in my church who goes, I disagree, and that's fair. That's fair. I'm not going to dog you for disagreeing. I get it. I don't have all the answers, right? But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments. So please, if you have any thoughts on the issue, please comment, please react, please reach out, because I genuinely would love to hear it. And I'm pretty open-minded, I like to think. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Last thing we'll talk about is this. I want to talk about Cain and Abel. We've been, I guess my last video was about the creation story, Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And essentially what started that is I'm doing this series on Genesis with my youth group. We're actually almost done. It's a 13-week series, so it's pretty long. It covers the main stories of Genesis. We didn't do it chapter by chapter by chapter, more so story by story by story. And so now we're doing the story of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel is an interesting story. It's completely interesting. If you think the Bible is boring, go read stories like Cain and Abel, or just go read Genesis. Genesis is a fascinating story. It's a fascinating book, but yeah, that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about Cain and Abel, and it's just so interesting to me, just how deep you can get with Cain and Abel. It's a simple story, but there's a lot of depth to it, and that's what I want to highlight. So we're going to start. I'm going to actually read through this a little bit, and I'm going to kind of break things down as I go. So this is verse 1. The man was intimate with his wife Eve, talking about Adam and Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I have had a male child with the Lord's help. She also gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel became a shepherd of the flocks, but Cain worked the ground. In the course of time, Cain presented some of the land's produce as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also presented an offering, some of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offering. Cain was furious, and he looked despondent. So I want to stop right here and kind of recap it and kind of break it down. You have Adam and Eve. They were kicked out of the garden, and eventually they had two sons, Cain and Abel. The way this is spelled out is similar to the way Jacob and Esau spelled out. Because essentially with both stories you have, here's who was born, and here's their roles. I know Jacob and Esau has a little bit about Jacob grabbing the heel and all that stuff, but essentially here's who it is, here's their role. So in the story of Cain and Abel, you have Cain. He's essentially a farmer. He works the ground. He works the field. He works in the ground and plants seeds, and he makes things grow. That's kind of his thing. It's what he does. Abel, he's a shepherd of the flock, so he deals more with animals. And with the other story, you have Esau, who is an outdoorsman. He's like a hunter. I think like the Duck Dynasty guys, right? And then you have Jacob, who's more of an inside kind of guy. Regardless, so you have Cain and Abel, works the ground, works the shepherds of the flock, and they both present an offering to the Lord. So they both present an offering. One of them presents, Cain presented some of the land's produce as an offering to the Lord. So it's just some of the Lord's produce. We don't know exactly what that means. We don't know exactly how that works or exactly what it was. It was just some of the land's produce. Abel also presented an offering, some of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. So we're given a little more information about Abel than we are Cain. It's not just some animals, it's the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. Firstborn, generally, if you look through Genesis, firstborn's pretty big deal. Firstborns in that society got the birthright, which means they got a double portion of the land that was divvied out after the death of the father. And they also got a blessing a lot of times. And so being a firstborn is a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. And then, so you have Abel, who gives some of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. It says the Lord had regard for Abel with the animals and his offering, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offering. Cain was furious, and he looked despondent. So at this point, Cain is just livid. He's fired up. He's fired up. I don't know, have you ever been fired up or like really angry? It takes quite a bit to get me fired up. But this apparently, excuse me, this apparently did it for Cain. I'll tell you that much. At this point in verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you furious, and why do you look despondent? If you do what is right, won't you be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." It's almost like God's giving him a warning here. Like, you look angry, you look very frustrated and just completely over it. But he kind of gives him a warning. If you do what is right, you'll be accepted. If you don't do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. So here he is kind of giving him a warning, like, hey, like, sin is crouching at your door, and it wants to rule over you, but you must rule over it. Cain does not listen. Verse 8 says, Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. Am I my brother's guardian?" Then he said, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." So here you have God who asks him a question, "Where's your brother Abel?" And it's funny how often God asks questions with answers he already knows. God said, what have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. And this is interesting. So now you're cursed, alienated from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood you have shed. If you work the ground, it will never again give you its yield. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. I think that's really interesting. We'll get there in a second, but it's really interesting that God took away from Cain the thing that he was best at, or the thing that he was least known for. Verse 13 says, "But Cain answered the Lord, 'My punishment is too great to bear.'" So it's a lot. "My punishment is too great to bear. Since you are banishing me today from the face of the earth, and I must hide from your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth, whoever finds me will kill me." Then the Lord replied to him, "In that case, whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." And he placed a mark on Cain so that whoever found him would not kill him. Then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. That's essentially the story of Cain and Abel. And when I read it, especially from the context of somebody who's never seen anyone die before, that's interesting. It really is. I mean, I don't think he expected Abel to die. I think he killed him, and once it happened, it's like, oh, what just happened? Why isn't he moving? Why isn't he breathing? He's limp. This is strange. And so thinking about it from that perspective is really interesting. I think it might have something to do with God's punishment towards Cain. You notice God didn't kill Cain. God didn't kill him. As a matter of fact, he protected him and gave him a mark so that if anybody met him, they wouldn't kill him. So God didn't kill him. He actually protected him. It's just interesting to me what his punishment for Cain is. But once again, we'll get there in a second. So a question I've been asking my youth group is this. You have all these stories in Genesis that are so interesting, and they were recorded for generations and passed down, and all this stuff, and they were preserved, and they used these stories as like guiding principles. So like, what's so special about the story of Cain and Abel that it was preserved and passed down and used as like guidance? Like, what is so special? And we had a lot of different answers. You know how it is with teens. A lot of them were really solid. Like, they really make sense. Some of them are silly. You know how teens are. But here's some things that we pulled out, and some things that I pulled out as well. One, jealousy can be a very dangerous thing. Jealousy can be a really, really dangerous thing. I mean, here you have a story where, God, he likes Abel's offering more than he likes Cain, and it makes him so angry that he actually kills his brother. Like, that's insane. Jealousy is a dangerous thing. And I think the thing about jealousy is that it generally has an attachment to something. It's not just random. A man's jealousy for his wife might be attached to his love for her. And perhaps in this story, Cain's jealousy over this issue is because he really wanted God to love him, and not even to love him, to what's the word say? Regard. Maybe he really wanted God to regard his blessing. So I think it had a good intention, or at least a good start, and then it got out of control, and all of a sudden he's killing his brother. There's nothing wrong with wanting God to regard your offering. There's nothing wrong with wanting God to be pleased with you. But there is an issue with making that your God and getting so upset that you're willing to do some horrible things because it didn't happen. That is wrong. That's where he messed up. And then we see this played out in today's world. We see this play out in today's world where people might not have what other people have, and they get really jealous and bitter about it and say some nasty and awful things about it, or even do some awful things. And we see it play out all over the place. It's just part of the human condition. But jealousy is a dangerous thing. So that's the first point we had. I have 3, so this is 2. What makes a sacrifice great? That's the second question we asked. What makes a sacrifice great? What was so special about Abel's sacrifice that God regarded it and not Cain's? What's so special about his sacrifice that God regarded it and not Cain's? That's a good question to ask. Matter of fact, it's a very good question to ask. I think at the end of the day, the answer goes back to the heart. I think it goes back to the heart. That's kind of the traditional, general answer you'll get on that question. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I agree with it. But I do... excuse me. But I do wonder if there's something more to this story. I'm not saying there is or there isn't. It's just a question I have. But essentially, what makes a sacrifice great is your heart. Matter of fact, Luke 21:1 says that as Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on. I think the ultimate thing that makes a sacrifice great is your heart. I don't think it has to do with necessarily what it is or anything like that. I think it's what is your heart doing while you're giving offerings to the Lord. So it makes me think about myself. What is my heart doing when I'm working for the Lord and when I'm putting in the time and using my time and my energy and my thought? What is my heart doing? Am I doing it because I'm obligated? Because I feel like I should? As a minister, am I doing it for a paycheck? The answer to that is no. What is my heart doing while I'm making sacrifices for the Lord? It's a good question to ask. And it's a good question to ask yourself consistently. If your heart's not in it, and if your heart's not right, and if you're not doing things not out of obligation, but just to please God and to love Him and worship Him and praise Him, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And this story tells us that that's not what sacrifice is about. It's not what sacrifice is about. Last point. It's more of a question that I honestly don't necessarily know the answer to. But it's interesting. If you look at chapter 4, verse 2. She also gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel became a shepherd of the flocks, but Cain worked the ground. In the course of time, Cain presented some of the land's produce as an offering to the Lord. And then you go down to his punishment, Cain's punishment after he killed his brother. So now you are cursed, alienated from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood you have shed. If you work the ground, it will never again give you its yield. You'll be a restless wanderer on the earth. I find it interesting that, let me back up. I don't know what Cain's relationship to his job was. I don't know if farming, we're going to call it farming. I don't know if farming was something he loved and enjoyed. I don't know if he had a natural talent for it. I don't know if maybe that's just kind of how it happened. And his parents said, "Hey, you're gonna do the ground and work the ground and make vegetables, and you're gonna be a shepherd of the flocks." I don't know his relationship to his job, but I do know this: Cain was good at it. Apparently, he did it for a long time. Apparently, and it seems like maybe I'm reading into it, but it seems like he enjoys it. It seems like he genuinely loves to work the ground. So, like I said, I don't know what his relationship with working the ground was, but I find it interesting that God gave him the gift of working the ground and then took that away as a punishment. And maybe that's me reading stuff into it. I'm open to that possibility, but I just find it interesting that God gave that's what Cain was known for, and God took that away from him. And I don't know if there's a moral to that story or a good answer to that question. I don't really know. But I think one thing we can extract from that is this. I think this shows us that we really do owe everything to God. God gave us abilities and talents and gifts. Who are we to use them for anything other than glorifying God? Some of us have gifts of leadership. Some of us have the gift of teaching. Some of us have the gift of faith and all these different things. And those are all good, but if we're using them for anything other than glorifying God, we are using them for the wrong reason. And we need to remember that just as soon as God gives us a gift, He can also take them away. He's powerful enough to do that. And I think that's an important thing to know. Like I said, I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to that question, but it is an interesting question to ask. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please comment on the video with your thoughts, because I don't want to just sit here and talk at a camera, although I will. I don't want to just do that. I want to know you. I want to grow with you. I want to have a relationship with you guys and really push each other. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. I want that. I want to build a community of people who love the Lord, love His Word, and want to dive in. So leave your comments, leave your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. And next week, we will be talking about... we're talking about the flood next week. That'll be good. So next week, we'll talk about the flood. I look forward to it. I hope you guys are having a great November. And also keep in mind, November is a great time to start celebrating Christmas. Bye!